Today I will be talking about slip stitch versus mosaic knitting. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I put out new knitting tutorial videos every Friday. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. I'm so glad to see you again. Slip stitch knitting is a form of knitting where stitches are slipped. Mosaic knitting is a subset of slip stitch knitting. Here is an example of a slip stitch pattern. Really, the only requirement with slip stitch knitting is that stitches are slipped. They can be slipped knitwise, they could be slipped purlwise, they could be slipped with the yarn held in front or the yarn held in back. This pattern slip stitches and worked increases and decreases within that slip stitch pattern. Only one color is used per row. So on this row of green, the pink stitches were slipped. Really, that's about it. Slip stitch knitting is a very broad genre of knitting. Mosaic knitting is a subset of slip stitch knitting. There are specific rules to mosaic knitting. Here is an example of a mosaic knit swatch. This was worked on a ground of garter. So the base fabric is garter. Again, only one color is worked per row, and the other stitches are slipped. With mosaic knitting, the yarn is always held to the wrong side of the work when the stitches are slipped. So a bar of yarn will never appear on the right side of the fabric in mosaic knitting, whereas in slip stitch knitting, it may or may not appear. Another rule to mosaic knitting is that every row is worked twice. So the right side, you are working and slipping. On the wrong side, you work again the stitches that were worked and slip the stitches that were slipped. So every pattern row is worked twice, once on the right side and once on the wrong side. And both of those rows are worked the same. Now, if you're working in garter, you will be knitting on both the right and the wrong side rows. When you slip your stitches, on the right side, you slip with the yarn held to the back. On the wrong side, you slip with the yarn held to the front, because the yarn is always held to the wrong side of the work. Mosaic knitting could also be worked on a ground of stockinette. Here is a mosaic pattern worked in stockinette. So again, two rows are worked. Each pattern row is worked twice. In this instance, because it's stockinette, the right side rows are knitted with stitches slipped. The wrong side rows are purled with stitches slipped with yarn held to the front. Again, the yarn is always held when slipping to the wrong side of the fabric. Here is that same pattern, but on a ground of garter. Because garter pulls in, this pattern is more squished, whereas this is a little more elongated. Another feature of mosaic knitting is that the patterns are very geometric. This is a function of the way the knitting is produced. Because every pattern row is worked twice and stitches are slipped, everything is in 90 degrees because of this. Therefore, the designs themselves end up looking very geometric. Another feature of mosaic knitting is that there is really no stitch multiple. Any number of stitches can be used in your project and the pattern can be maintained. The exception would be if you are wanting to center a motif in your design, then you would need to calculate the number of stitches needed in order to center a design. But you wouldn't have to. The mosaic knitting will still work. The first and last stitches of a row are always worked in the working color. This anchors that color at the edges. So that is a quick comparison of slip stitch knitting versus mosaic knitting. I hope this was helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.